There was a misperception on the side of Washington earlier on that they had more leverage over China than they actually did. China has made it very clear with its some 90% of production, 70% of processing of rare earths, that they very much have a very strong point of leverage over the U.S. and over the other countries as well. As I said somewhere else very recently, China's absolutely not going to give up that point of leverage.
Let's turn our attentions to Donald Trump's trip to Asia. He's set for a crucial meeting with China's President Xi this week. That's after the United States confirmed it's agreed the framework for a trade deal between the two countries. The US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said it includes a final deal on TikTok and a deferral of China's tightened rare earth minerals controls. Here he is speaking to CBS News.
And I believe that is effectively off the table. I'm not going to get ahead of the two leaders who will be meeting in Korea on Thursday, but I can tell you we had a very good 2 days, so I would expect that the threat of the 100% has gone away, as has the threat of the immediate imposition of the Chinese initiating a worldwide export control regime.
OK, well, let's speak to Dexter Roberts, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and author of a weekly newsletter, Trade War, about China, business and politics. Dexter, good evening to you.
Good evening. Good to be on.
And thanks so much for being with us. I wonder if we're at a tariff truce point between China and the USA.
I think that's very likely. Thursday, when Xi and Trump sit down together, they will announce, as Treasury Secretary Bessent said, the U.S. is not going to impose the 100% tariffs that Trump recently threatened on China. China will put a halt or a temporary halt to the latest rare earth restrictions. I think Bessent said that would probably be for 1 year. I should point out, however, that even without the latest 100% tariffs that were threatened, the U.S. has tariffs upwards of 50% on China, and China has tariffs on the U.S. of about 30%. So those aren't going away right now, as far as we know.
I'm just sort of looking at sort of who might be the winner in this, because as much as China, I'm sure, are grateful of this trade truce, China has a huge grip on rare earths, doesn't it? The data tells us that China really dominates nearly every part of rare earths. So reserves, mine production, refined production of heavy rare earths, rare earth magnets, all the different divisions. China's hugely dominant. And I think, well, I'm going to ask you actually whether you think America's had to concede to this point, because they can't possibly support the manufacturing, or the America First approach. That they can't possibly support that without having the free flow of rare earths from China.
No, I think you're right, Kate. I think there was a misperception on the side of Washington earlier on that they had more leverage over China than they actually did. China has made it very clear with its some 90% of production, 70% of processing of rare earths, that they very much have a very strong point of leverage over the U.S. and over the other countries as well. As I said somewhere else very recently, China's absolutely not going to give up that point of leverage. They've made it clear, my understanding is within internal talks, that they've made it clear that they see they would like some sort of reciprocal unwinding of export controls that the U.S. has on China, particularly on advanced technology and advanced semiconductors, in exchange for China unwinding or halting export restrictions on rare earths. So what we've seen now is a 1-year halt on the latest restrictions that China threatened to impose, which would have included products containing rare earths as well, not just the rare earths themselves. But there's no reason to think China won't continue to maintain this stranglehold on rare earths. They can continue to slow walk permit permits for exports of rare earths, and exert their leverage in other ways.
Okay, now Trump has been in Japan. Today, he's already won a $550 billion investment pledge from Tokyo. That is in exchange for respite from punishing import tariffs. We can see the theme here. But, as always with Donald Trump, and particularly when he makes these trips, and this is a really huge trip for Donald Trump. It represents some of the longest time that he's sort of spent away from the White House, really, since he took his seat again as president in January. Japan hosts the largest concentration of US military power abroad. And what Trump has said previously is Tokyo's not spending enough to defend its islands from an increasingly assertive China. So we've got a contradiction here where it's all, friendly over trade. Trump is also quietly trying to press upon Japan the need for them to spend more on military power to try and, fight off some of the threat of China.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely, that message is being made loud and clear, I'm quite certain, to the new Japanese prime minister. She has indicated, I believe, that Japan would consider spending more on military.
And she wants to boost her defense spending.
Likely going forward as well.
Okay. Let's just talk about what we're going to get in South Korea. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there are lots of anti-China rallies going on at the moment in South Korea. And again, it's all about the contradictions. The Chinese president, Xi, is going to rock up for these talks with Donald Trump on Thursday. I wonder what else we might get from that, and whether the backdrop of it being in South Korea is important.
Well, I think some of the things we know that we're pretty sure are going to happen. China is going to buy more American soybeans. This is politically very important to President Trump. Soybean producers, who are largely, by the way, in red states and have been pretty reliable Republican supporters, are doing very badly. Bankruptcies are rising amongst farmers more broadly in the U.S. So we're likely to see China commit to more soybean purchases. There's likely to be a TikTok deal. This is something that Trump has indicated, despite what the U.S. Congress said in a law that trying to limit TikTok's influence in the U.S. Trump has made it very clear that he would like to see a deal on TikTok. That's likely to happen as well. There's likely to be progress on fentanyl. And that could actually be to China's benefit as well. Early this year, the Trump administration imposed 20% tariffs on China for its lack of progress in solving the issue that they're a major exporter of fentanyl precursor elements. So what we might see is new curbs by China to try to protect, to limit those exports to the U.S. that have caused so much damage to the U.S. population. And at the same time, the Trump administration might unwind some of those tariffs that were imposed earlier on regarding fentanyl. So those are all things that are likely to happen in South Korea.
What does President Xi think of Donald Trump? If we're to try and get into the head of President Xi, is he just, happy to do business with Donald Trump? It is all about the business relationship for him. What kind of insight can you give us there, Dexter?
Yeah, I'm not specifically sure about President Xi himself, but I do think that more broadly, the Chinese leadership sees Trump as more transactional, which they welcome. Less concerned about issues, some of the sort of fundamental issues like human rights that have bedeviled the relationship in the past. They also welcome that. And so I think the transactional side of Trump is something they very much appreciate or welcome. I think there's also the possibility of Trump showing more flexibility vis-a-vis the U.S. relationship and U.S. support for Taiwan, which is something that Beijing absolutely would like to see. So those are all positives in Beijing's book in dealing with President Trump.
Look, thank you for being with us. Good stuff there. That is Dexter Roberts, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and author of a weekly newsletter, Trade War. It's about China business and politics. And of course, we'll be following Donald Trump's trip to Asia all week, culminating in that key meeting with President Xi in South Korea on Thursday.